What's up, guys? So today we're going to be doing the Thor Dark World Easter eggs and references. I've also just thrown in some theories as well, just to sort of help break up the monotony of these videos, because there's only so many of these reference videos you can make in a row before you start getting bored of making reference videos. But yeah. I'm also going to be having the Thor soundtrack being played in the background. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear it. I haven't sound tested this yet. So if you can't hear it, you can't hear it. If you can, that's great. Just sort of add a bit of production value to these videos as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first reference that I was able to find was the millennia ago, which is like the first two words of the narration by Odin at the beginning. This allows it to set up that Asgardians do indeed live for at least 5,000 years longer than mortals. Which I believe Loki says in Avengers. He may say it later on in this film, I can't entirely remember, but I know that Loki does say, give or take 5,000 years in regards to their lifespans. This first opening scene also obviously introduces us to Malekith and Olgrim, who are the two sort of dark elf villains of the film. It also shows us Bor, who is Thor's grandfather and Odin's father, and it shows us a really cool fight scene between the Dark Elves and the Einherjar, who are the Asgardian soldiers. The ether as well, the reason it's sort of fluid, and I will get to that and the fluidity of it in a second, but the reason it is a fluid is because ether is a Latin word that means space, and by that I mean like outer space. It's usually considered to be a fifth element in conjunction with fire, earth, water, and air. Three of which are sort of referenced later on in the film as well, when looking at some of the planets in the conversion. We then get to see Loki handcuffed. They are different handcuffs from what he was put in Avengers, and he's missing the face mask that he has in Avengers at the end of Avengers as well. But this shows that the main continuity of this is taking on straight after the events of Avengers. We then get to go to the Battle of Vanaheim. Vanaheim itself is the world of the old gods. In Viking mythology, the gods are sort of separated into two families, I guess. One of them is called the Vanir, who live in Vanaheim, and the other are called the Aesir, who live in Asgard. And obviously their places are named after them because they mean either home of or place of the respective family. We then get to meet a Cronin, who, if you don't remember, is the big rock guy that Thor smashes into little pebbles. He's also a member of the Cronins, who were also known as the Stone Men from Saturn, who first appeared in the first ever appearance of Thor in Journey into Mystery. We then go to Asgard, again named for the Aesir, means place of the Aesir, as opposed to Vanaheim's home of the Vanir. And we get a much clearer look at either Hugin or Munin, as Odin is sort of holding onto one and communicating with it, as they are his messengers in mythology. Then Thor appears and Odin asks him if the Nine Realms have been brought to peace and how Vanaheim is, etc. To which Thor replies, yes, as are Nornheim and Raya. Now, in the comics, the Norns are an equivalent to the Greek fates, and they are therefore three sort of witch characters that decide when humans live and die. This is opposed to the Raya being the planet that the Cronins are from in the Marvel Universe. They're not actually from Saturn, they're from a planet called Raya. And obviously for them to be from Saturn, they had to travel to Saturn before preparing to attack Earth in the comics. But what's interesting to note about their planet being called Raya, while they are called Cronins, is if you have any idea about Greek mythology, which seems weird since this is all based in Norse mythology, but if you have any idea about Greek mythology, Cronus is the father of Zeus, and his Roman counterpart is called Saturn, which is what the planet was named after. So if they're from Saturn, they're going to be called Cronins. Raya in Greek mythology is Rhea, and she is Cronus' wife. So their planet is named after the wife of the planet that they're named for. And Raya also happens to be a moon of Saturn as well. So there could be potential that that's where they're from in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but that remains to be seen. We then get a nice little passing line about the Battle of Harakin. So in the comics, Harakin is the leader of the Anhaya, who, as I've said before, are the Asgardian soldiers, both in the film and in the comics. He is used in the comics by Hela to try and attack Asgard, and comes up against Odin and Thor and the Warriors 3, and is unsuccessful in his siege, despite having used the mind-controlling Warlock's Eye, which is seen in the vault at the beginning of the first Thor film. And now we're getting more of a backstory of how they actually got that. So if you were a comic fan, as soon as I said Battle of Harakin, you would have known exactly how they got the Warlock's Eye in the first Thor film. I've then got a sort of theory that I don't know if they're going to go with, but it's that Richard, the guy who is on the date with Jane, is Richard Rider. His last name is never stated, not even in the credits. So this is a possibility. However, in the comics, Richard Rider is American, and here he's British. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because Marvel has been taking liberties when it comes to their cinematic universe. We then see this poster on a wall as Darcy and Jane are driving away after the sort of date scene. And it says, as you can clearly see, is your journey really necessary? And a lot of people think this is in reference to Journey into Mystery, which is obviously the name of the comic book Thor first appeared in. It could also be a Captain America reference, since he was from the war, and this is a war poster. So it could be a 2-in-1 sort of thing. But yeah, still interesting to note. We then get the little cutaway shot of Eric being naked at Stonehenge, followed very closely by the scene where Jane and Darcy arrive at the place where they've got the gravitational anomalies going on. And while there's no actual sort of references to anything from the comics or anything, it is interesting to note that the shipping containers are arranged in a sort of Stonehenge fashion, with them standing upright, and there are even two sitting across on the top, in the same way that Stonehenge has its rocks organised in the same manner. They then are looking at the readings when they're dropping soda bottles through the convergence, and Darcy says that the readings look like the ones from New Mexico. This is obviously in reference to the massive gravitational anomaly that the Bifrost is, and we get to see those readings on the shield gear in the first Thor film. And yeah, then Jane gets sucked away and gets the ether into her, and obviously that incites Thor to come and get her. Marauders were pillaging. In the movie, this is the line that Thor gives to Jane as part of his excuse for why he was away for so long. And in the comics, there is a group called Marauders. However, they are X-Men characters. And they're also villains as well. But they were brought together by Mr. Sinister and Gambit. Gambit created them in exchange for his freedom, and the Marauders, at the request of Mr. Sinister, ended up killing another group of mutates called Morlocks, which I believe is also the name of the underground people from the Time Machine, but I could be wrong. While Jane's in the Bifrost and on Asgard, it's sort of interesting to note here that in the comics she was actually allowed to go to Asgard as part of the Congress of Worlds, and I believe this was just before she ended up getting proving herself worthy of Mjolnir and becoming the new Thor, I believe. We then visit Svartalfheim, which, if you speak any sort of Northern European language or Germanic language, you will know that Svartalfheim literally translates to home of the Dark Elves. That is what the planet means. And it is obviously one of the 9 realms of the Viking cosmology. We then quickly get to meet Ymir, who is, and I hope I pronounced that right, but she is the Viking goddess of medicine. She's the one operating the Soul Forge, or the quantum field generator, that recognizes that the ether is inside Jane. The other relics appear as stones, while the ether is fluid, getting back to the fluidity of the ether. This 100% cements it as a Infinity Stone of the MCU. The others that we've seen so far are the Space Stone, the Tesseract, and the Mind Stone, which is inside the gem of Loki's scepter. We then get to see Kurse walk in with the rest of the Marauders from Vanaheim, and he's wearing a red and yellow mask, which is reminiscent of his comic book costume that he's sort of known for wearing. While conversing with Frigga and Odin, some Einherjar and Lady Sif walk past, and she gives Jane some pretty good stink eye, leading to the theory that either Sif or Jane Foster, as I think is probably more likely, is actually the Asgardian enchantress called Amora in the comics. And this theory sort of goes along the lines of the fact that Amora was at one point a love interest of Thor, but when Thor decided that she wasn't sort of the right one for him, got really jealous and started trying to manipulate Thor into being with her, and she sort of gets jealous of all of Thor's other lovers. The stink eye made people believe that Sif could become that, but Sif is also a character from the comics, and as we sort of explained before, Jane eventually becomes the new Thor. So if they were taking liberties with that side of things and with the sort of story surrounding Enchantress, Jane Foster is a more likely candidate, especially since the love interest in Ragnarok was Valkyrie. In the comics, Malekith has a blue and black face split equally down the middle, and in the film he has some Harvey Dent style scarring on one side of his face that's so kindly given to him by Thor after he kills Frigga. And so this was sort of the MCU's way of giving Malekith his signature two-faced look. The funeral scene for Frigga is actually very historically correct with some of the practices that they do in portraying the Viking funeral. And a lot of this information that we have on Viking funerals has come from a wreck, particularly ship burials, by the way, has come from a wreck of a ship called the Oseberg ship. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And it was a burial found near, wait for it, Tonsberg, which we all know is the little town that is beset upon by frost giants in the beginning of the first Thor film, and then beset upon by Hydra in Captain America First Avenger, and now it's the source material for a burial scene involving Frigga. Now, I'd love to know what this character's name actually is, because Loki uses his likeness so much that he just about needs his own name. I've simply taken to calling him the soldier that brought the bad news, because he is the one that brings Loki the news of Frigga's death when he's still in prison. And then later on, Loki uses him as the guy that brings the bad news of Loki's passing, inverted commas, to Odin, before Loki throws him out, puts him on Earth, whatever happens there. The Easter egg to end all Easter eggs, Selvig's chalkboard. Of the mad scribblings that are on this board, a lot of them have been sort of taken and applied to the comics, and therefore we've found out what some of them can mean. Some of the things written on the board include a gravitational anomaly, which obviously is any disruption of gravity, like the fire truck that floats, or black holes. We got Yang-Mills anomalies, which are a disruption of the basic principles of particle physics, particularly as applied to weak and electromagnetic forces. 616 universe is written on this board as well. That is the designation applied by the omniversal magistrates of Otherworld to distinguish the Marvel universe from an infinite number of parallel worlds. And it was first seen in The Daredevils number 7 from 1983. It is the main comic continuity, hence why the cinematics, the movies and stuff, are called the cinematic universe. They are designated as 19999. The Nine Realms is also written up there. They are obviously the ancient Norse conception of the universe. Simonson's theory of relativity. The theory of relativity is Einstein's, not Simonson's. So this is a reference to Einstein's theory of relativity, which would have a lot to do here, but it's also attributed to the writer-artist of Walter Simonson, who is also a quantum hobbyist. We get to see Nexus of Reality is written up there. That is a location in the Florida Everglades where parallel worlds sometimes intersect. Obviously, the Everglades, again, where Man-Thing is from. So now we've had references to him in 3 different films. So I'm still wondering when Man-Thing will actually get a film, because obviously he exists in the MCU. The alignment is written up there. That's the moment once every 5,000 years when the realms align and the convergence becomes possible. Schrödinger is written up there. He's an Austrian physicist and was a pioneer in fields of quantum theory, wave mechanics, and feline irradiation. Schrödinger's cat obviously being referenced in that description of that. The Fault is written up there as well. That's a rip in the fabric of the universe, first seen in the comic book War of Kings #6 in 2009. Cosmic Eclipse is also written up there, and that is the point at which a black hole, the black hole of Svartalfheim intersects with all 9 realms. The Crossroads is written up there as well. That's a gateway dimension consisting primarily of portals to other worlds, and was first seen in Incredible Hulk 300, 1984. Brain, spelled B-R-A-N-E, is up there as well. It's a mathematical concept used in string theory. Phase transition is up there as well. That's a transformation of one state of matter to another. It could also be the fact that this is now phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and again, just like in Iron Man 3, we have a reference to that. And then Dark Energy of the Universe is a long theorized source of Malekith's power manifested through the black hole of Svartalfheim. Obviously, the Dark Energy of the Universe in this film is the ether. Also written up there is Kyle plus Yost equals X. This is in reference to a writer-artist duo, I believe, who wrote and created the character X-23. This is obviously Marvel just giving some credit to some of their artists and writers, and the reason they've got it equaling X is because X is the unknown, but I'm sure that this is back when Disney started talks with Fox about acquiring their movie side of things. So it's unknown, maybe we might get the X-Men. This obviously then follows into Stan Lee's cameo as one of the elderly gentlemen in either a very high security nursing home or some kind of asylum. And he asks for his shoe back, which is odd that this film has such a fascination with shoes, considering that earlier in the film, Darcy wants to throw something through the convergence and asks for Jane's shoe, and then when Jane walks away, turns and asks Ian for his shoe, and now Stanley's asking for his shoe back off Selvig, who's been using it to show how the convergence works. Tyr is a small character throughout most of the film, but I'm going to mention him here as this is when he comes in to tell Odin about the treasonous sort of escape plan of Loki and Thor, and obviously Heimdall's implication in that, and the Warriors 3 and Sif as well. There is a theory for why Heimdall can't see the Dark Elves, and that is because they would have existed and been freely roaming around before he took up his position as the gatekeeper of Asgard. So therefore, that he wouldn't have recognized what they looked like. Their stealth tech may be more advanced than the technology he knows exists, and so therefore he's not able to perceive them as existing purely because for his time they were thought to be extinct, and therefore he wasn't necessarily looking for them. It doesn't makes sense, that theory, for why he didn't see their ship just floating around in space somewhere and be like, what's that? What are those things living on it? So yeah, it doesn't really explain it, but it does give some sort of an explanation as to why he couldn't see them until they were sort of flying past his little dome. There is a part then, while arguing with Thor about what the right course of action is to do as well, and I'm starting to get the timeline of the movie a bit mixed up, but there's a part there where Odin sort of clutches his arm and sort of turns away a bit. This could be a sign that the Odin sleep is coming up, and he needs to go and regenerate his powers, which could explain how Loki was able to get rid of him so easily. Maybe he waited until Odin fell into the Odin sleep, took him to Earth, and was able to be back in time before Thor came back to sort of tell Odin what he decided to do in regards to Jane Foster. The Way is known only to a few, is also brought in, and I've really messed up the timeline here of this film. Oh well. That is the reference to how Loki was able to get the Frost Giants into Asgard without letting Heimdall in on the fact that the Frost Giants had actually made it in. So yeah, it's a nice little sort of way of them subtly saying, we're going to have to break Loki out of prison because we need him, despite the fact that he's kind of a jerk. Thor is finally, in this film, able to see through Loki's illusions. Obviously in Avengers, Loki does the whole "you're gonna get me" stance, and then ends up just being an illusion, to which Loki then says, are you ever not going to fall for that? When Thor comes to talk to Loki after the death of Frigga, he says, enough Loki, no more illusions, and lo and behold, it's all a big illusion, and Loki's looking like he's descending into a very deep depression because of Frigga's death. Also, for this scene, it's funny to note that Loki has a thing about being in cages and then asking the people that aren't in cages why they're so truly desperate. Those are his exact words too, truly desperate. In Avengers, he says that to Nick Fury about how desperate are you? You call on such lost creatures to defend you. And then here he says to Thor, you must be truly desperate to come to me for help. So he obviously has a thing about being in a cage and then asking people why they're desperate. Captain America's costume then, when Loki transforms into him, it's interesting to note that this is the Avengers suit, and there are two possible reasons, both of which are just as likely as the other for why this is. The first is that Marvel didn't want to give away what the suit was going to look like for Captain America Winter Soldier, which was released after Thor Dark World, and Chris Evans was actually filming the film at the time when he had to come and do this cameo as well. And the other reason is that it's just how Loki remembers him from the Avengers, and so that's how he's able to portray him. Okay, the battle on Svartalfheim at the end, before Curse dies, because there's a couple of ones at the end, show a few things. First, Thor loses his hand in the illusion. Again, another MCU character losing their hand in homage to Luke Skywalker from Empire Strikes Back. Yes, Empire Strikes Back. And later on, Curse loses his arm first into the black hole grenade. While fighting Thor, Thor tries to call his hammer Mjolnir to him, only for it to be knocked aside by Curse. Not even the Hulk could do this. The Hulk, remember, caught the hammer in his hand when it was thrown at him in Avengers, and it just sent him flying backwards. But somehow Curse is able to manipulate its movements. So is Curse worthy of Mjolnir? Let me know in the comment section down below if you think that is a possibility, or if that's 100% true, or if it's just that they wanted to up the ante of the fight for whatever reason. At the end of that fight, when Loki sort of allows himself to get stabbed, and then sets off the black hole grenade, he says, "See you in hell." Now this seems like it's just any old random throwaway action movie line, but in actual fact it's not, because hell is the realm that Hela is from, and you know, the realm that she rules over, and it's only spelt with one L, not with two. It's in Norse mythology, it's in the comics, and so it could also be a reference to the fact that Hela was what they were planning on having as the big bad guy from Ragnarok, Thor 3. We then go back to London, where Jayan says that the fabric of reality will be torn apart by the convergence and all of the energy that will be cycling around through the different realms. And I think it's also in reference to the ether taking over everything as it goes through all the portals, and growing exponentially. And this is where we sort of get the referencing that the ether is the reality stone. And to further back this up, in Age of Ultron, and I am getting ahead of myself here, but in Age of Ultron, Scarlet Witch has sort of like an ether-ish glow around her hands when she's using her powers. That is also red. In the comics, she can manipulate reality, so it kind of makes sense that if they're going to bring Scarlet Witch in and her powers are going to be red, in order to make it more understandable for general audiences, to make their reality stone red as well, so that you can just explain that, oh no, her powers came from an Infinity Stone and they're red, therefore it's just ether energy or whatever. Quicksilver's stream behind him has a slight blue tinge. He can move through space really quickly, like physical space really quickly. Therefore his powers would be a synthetic version of the Tesseract's powers with the Space Stone. Despite coming from the Mind Stone, which hasn't, for whatever reason, given Vision mind powers. But yeah, if you liked that little sort of clue in, give this video a thumbs up, please. We then go and visit Jotunheim, home of the giants. Jotun being simply the Viking word for giant and not for frost giant, despite the fact that they are frost giants. And that's where we get to see the, at least what I believe to be a Bilge-Snipe come through and starts to chase some dark elves and keeps them busy while the rest of the fight's going on. We then get a nice aerial, like from the ground, looking up at the sky, and we get to see a couple of different realms. From memory, the one that was most sort of anticipated was the Muspelheim one, which is the one that looks like it's made of lava. It's obviously the realm that Surtur, the fire demon, comes from. It's the fiery realm that he lives in. We also get to see a blue one, which is obviously Jotunheim, which we got to go to in the first Thor film. There is a green one that looks like the fields of Vanaheim, which we explored at the beginning of the film. And then there's sort of I believe there's a grey sort of rocky looking one, which is possible that it's Raya, considering that's where the stone men come from, the Cronins. But it could also be just that's Svartalfheim as being viewed from Midgard. So there's a couple of possibilities for what they are there. Malekith is the third character in this film alone to lose an arm first as he's dying. His arm is the first thing that disappears because he catches the first pole and it takes away his arm, and then obviously the next ones take away different parts of his body until his ship falls and crushes him. We then get to see Anthony Hopkins' Odin sitting very sort of, not regally like he usually does when he's sitting in the throne, but very much in the style of Loki, letting keen-eyed viewers know that that's actually Loki, and therefore to not fall for his illusions. The fact that Thor didn't fall for his illusions earlier and now apparently does says a lot for the continuity of whether or not he can see through illusions or not. And we find out that he didn't actually know in Ragnarok when he's told that Odin isn't actually on Asgard. Alright, we then get our after credits scenes, which are Volstagg and Sif handing over the ether to the Collector, and then Thor coming back to kiss Jane Foster. Alright, so in the first one, we get to see a couple of different things. We get to see the Sovereign Cocoon. It's undoubtedly a Sovereign Cocoon, as that is how their people are born. But it's not, as we know as of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Adam Warlock's. That doesn't mean that it still can't be a Sovereign one, which is the most likely. We then are also shown Karina to begin with. She's not named, but I believe it's the same actress, and she's the same species and so forth. We get to see I hope I'm remembering which one is which correctly, but we get to see a Zeronian, and it's the one that sort of has the weird, it's the female looking one that has sort of the weird mouth thing. In the comics they have tusks that sort of grows over their mouth. And then we also get to see a Hercturian, which I believe is the guy that looks like he has computer bits coming at the back of his head, that's just sort of slouched up against the wall of his cell behind the two Asgardians. They tell the Collector that it's unwise to keep two Infinity Stones so close together. Two things about this. The first one is that it lets us know that the Tesseract, which is on Asgard as of the end of the Avengers, is definitely an Infinity Stone, and therefore is the Space Stone since it can open up portals. And the second thing is that it probably means that at some point before, someone else had collected the Infinity Stones, and sort of there's a storyline in the comics where that's happened, and then afterwards there's a thing that's called Infinity Watch, which is set up. They each take one stone and they send them away from each other so that no one can sort of reassemble the Infinity Gauntlet. So it's possible that that is an unseen history in the MCU. The Collector then very creepily says 1 down, 5 to go, letting us know that he's either wanting to collect them for himself. They are like the ultimate collector's items in the MCU after all. Or that he's working for Thanos, which is entirely possible considering the price that he puts on the orb when he makes the deal with Gamora. We then get the scene where Jane Foster kisses Thor. Natalie Portman, who plays Jane, wasn't actually available for that scene, so they used Chris Hemsworth's wife, Elsa Pataki, and all they did was they just threw a wig on her and the costume, some makeup, so that she looked similar, and then had her very, they didn't really show her face too much, so that you could believe that it was still Natalie Portman. But that sort of explains why that kiss is more passionate than any of the other ones in the Thor films between Thor and Jane. Some behind the scenes stuff. There is an extended scene for the celebration of the Battle of Vanaheim, where Volstagg is telling his story, and he actually refers to Fandral the Dashing, Hogan the Grim, and Volstagg and then a woman sitting next to Fandral says Voluminous. These are their actual titles from the comics. And that was about it from the other scenes. There was one that Odin keeps secrets, which obviously is a reference to the fact that he didn't tell Thor or Loki about Hela. And then that Frigga is the goddess of prophecy, magic, love, and fertility. Hence her aptitude at being a wife and mother, and also at how well she was able to train Loki in magic, despite him not being an Asgardian. And then the last bit for the Thor video is obviously it's one shot that came out with it, and this is the last one shot that Marvel have yet produced. They may come back with them, but it's unlikely. And this is the All Hail the King, where we find out that the Mandarin wasn't the Mandarin. Coming up between the dragon and his wrath is possibly the best way they could have started this one shot. It references King Lear, which is the play that's referenced as being the role that Travis Slattery absolutely killed in Iron Man 3 when Killian says his Lear was the toast of Croydon. But it also lets us know about the dragon, Fin Fang Foom, the Makluan, Makwan Power Rings, Mandarin, and his wrath, as in, you've just used his name, he's coming after you now. We get the Ten Rings is mentioned as the terrorist group most historically related to the Mandarin, and it's also a tattoo that Jackson Norris has on his, I believe it's on his neck. Jackson Norris also is a comic character. I believe he is, in the comics at least, he's the hero Nighthawk. I know it's not Starhawk. I believe it's Nighthawk. But he's a comic book character anyway that they've sort of perverted for their own use here. We get to see Razor again in a photo when Jackson Norris is telling Trevor that he's come to collect his master's name for him. And then in a post-credit scene for a one-shot, we get to see Justin Hammer being a douche and telling his boyfriend not now while they're eating lunch in the mess room. So that's it, guys. We've finally done it. We've got through Thor the Dark World and all of its Easter eggs, references, and even some really sort of compelling theories. If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Don't forget to leave a comment down, subscribe, all that other good stuff. And until next time, guys, keep raising.